What if I told you K-pop Demon Hunters is actually about generational trauma? K-pop Demon Hunters has taken the world by storm, and if you're not living under a rock, chances are you've probably listened to their songs even if you haven't watched the movie, such as Metal Soda Pop, Dun Dun Dun, Golden. I mean, seriously, all their songs have been such bangers. Even now, a few months later, I still haven't gotten your idol out of my head. Yeah, I'm all you need, I will be your idol. Living, my. Okay, anyways, let's be real here. Yes, we are getting our soul sucked the moment Soda Pop releases in real life. Now, K-pop Demon Hunters is a pretty straightforward movie. The story basically revolves around Huntrix, not only a global superstar K-pop girl group, but also the latest in a long line of warriors who secretly fight soul-eating demons. Through the power of their music, they construct the Honmoon, a barrier which repels those invaders. Now, the plot essentially revolves around them as they battle the Sage Boys, which is also a K-pop idol group, and whose members are secretly demons. Very, very handsome demons. And yes, trust me, this is very crucial to the plot. These things are not really anything new nor groundbreaking, and some might even call it cliche. However, K-pop Demon Hunter's execution of it was exceptionally brilliant. It wasn't a hollow story, and I'm always a firm believer that people can tell when something is done with so much love, and I felt that in this movie. I watched the K-pop and K-drama references, which was clearly a love letter to the genre. I watched as all the action scenes are actually in sync with the beat of the background music. And everything was done so artistically and with so much passion, and the story is no exception. The themes of facing our fears and insecurities, self acceptance, and camaraderie were represented beautifully. And behind that is the fact that the whole conflict of the movie might have actually originated from generational trauma. Are you staying with me here? Did you manage to connect the dots yet? Or you don't believe it? Anyways, that's basically what this whole video is. Let's delve into it. In order to fully understand this concept, we have to first understand that the Honmoon Barrier is evil. At the very least, it's imperfect. It was always meant to be destroyed. At first glance, the Honmoon Barrier presents itself as pure heroism and protection, but there's a clear contradiction in its design. We learn as we progress along the movie that this supposed barrier became a cage somewhere along the line. A cage built on emotional suppression, which not only has done significant psychological damage to its wielders, but proved to be strategically and canonically weaker than the demons themselves. In fact, you can actually already see this from the first few minutes of the movie when they were performing at their concert. To begin with, K-pop Demon Hunters has never been shy of reiterating its main message. We see this in Huntrix songs and each Huntrix member's development. We see as Rumi tries to hide her demon marks because of her insecurities and fearing what might people think. Zoe being a people pleaser in fear of being abandoned, and Mira choosing to shut a lot of her emotions and becoming somewhat of a badass persona because she was regarded as a black sheep within her family. The whole movie's point is to embrace one's imperfections. In the first scenes of the movie, when Huntrix was holding a concert, we see the Honmoon Barrier represented in blue color, while the demons are represented in red. The movie is set and takes its inspiration from South Korea. Now, if we are to align these colors based on Korean culture and beliefs, we can surmise that the Honmoon or the blue color presents stability, honesty, and harmony, while red or the demons represent chaos and strife, and basically everything that comes along with it. However, what's interesting is the fact that Honmoon's end goal is to become golden as seen from this clip. Throughout history, the color golden has always been the symbol of perfection. The golden ratio, the golden rule, the golden standard, and many more other golden things that symbolizes a complete idealized version of something or a certain concept. Golden equals perfection. But why does perfection appear here? This directly goes against the message of the movie itself, and the age-old belief that simply nothing is built to be perfect. Adding on to the fact that the Honmoon Barrier gets its source from, well, exactly, from us, humans. Perfection was always meant to be non existent because humans are imperfect beings, quirks, flaws, and everything that comes along with it. A system that demands perfection from inherently flawed people was bound to collapse at some point. Now, even with just a glance of the color choice and palette of the movie, we can already tell that the Honmoon Barrier carried the seeds of its downfall from the first few minutes of the movie. In fact, if you can rank all the pieces that we have, one will probably even say that the barrier actually served as the main conflict of the film. And yet, this is only scratching the surface. To further understand the intricacies of the movie, we need to dig even deeper. examining not only the themes but also the mechanics, references, and other symbolisms woven into the film. In order to do that, we need to first understand what actually is the Honmoon Barrier and how it works, and where exactly does the generational trauma come in. In understanding the barrier, we first must start with its origins. A long time ago, demons preyed on humans, feeding their souls to their ruler Guima, the main antagonist of the film. Eventually, three women became demon hunters, which would then create the Honmoon to seal the demons away to another dimension. The Honmoon Barrier is basically an ancient and sacred form of harmonic magic. It's a protective barrier generated by the ritualistic performance of the said demon hunters, usually in the form of music or songs like concerts or even just performance on the street. However, this is imperfect. The barrier has to be maintained and strengthened continuously throughout generations in order to banish demons permanently, sparking the legacy of a long line of musicians slash warriors that will continue until the modern age of Huntrix. Now, culturally and traditionally, there is no direct comparison or basis of Honmun from Korean mythology. However, it can be inferred that the Honmun rituals are loosely inspired from Korean Gut rituals, which are ceremonies or rites that are renewed periodically, which usually is inherited from generation to generation, very similar to how the demon hunters are. Let's talk about the name of Honmun itself. The name Honmun originated from two words: Yonghon, which is the word for soul or spirit, and Moon, which is commonly the word for door. Sometimes can also be used to mean gate. The literal meaning of Honmun is spirit gate or soul gate. In other words, a pathway to the human soul. This context is very important because it provides us a clue to the inner workings of the barrier, in which that it is something deeply connected with souls or spirit. The premise of the Honmun barrier is simple. You use the power of songs to create a barrier that can repel and defeat demons. The movie never really specified the details of how this whole process happens, which led me to piece together my own understanding of its mechanics. To make things simple, we can think of the Honmun Barrier as a car. A car has an engine which makes things run. The performance or the ritual that Huntrix does in their concerts is the engine. However, a car cannot run on an engine alone. It needs fuel or gasoline, which are the people. Question is, how do people fuel the barrier? Right from the movie, the narrator says that their music ignites the souls of people and brings them together. With this connection, the first hunters created the shield to protect our world. After the scene, we then see orbs of light coming from the people, which presumably are a part of their souls, as these lights get weaved into strings that make the barrier. What does it actually mean to ignite someone's soul? How do these ignited souls fuel the ritual? And what becomes of the soul once it's drawn into the Honmun itself? Now, this phenomenon might be better explained through the Koreans' belief of Honbek, the dual nature of the human essence, composed of Hon, which is the spirit, and Bek, which is the vital essence. Interestingly enough, the barrier is called Honmun, which gives us insight that there might be parallels or references that are connected with each other. To put it simply, Hon is your higher self, your consciousness, your mind, and your unique identity. It's the you that thinks and wills. On the other hand, Beck is the source of your vitality, instincts, and most importantly, your emotions. It's the you that feels. These two aspects are inseparably linked. When the Beck is stirred, the Hon responds. When the Hon weakens, so too does the Beck. With this understanding in mind, we can answer our first two questions of what does it mean to ignite someone's soul and how do these ignited souls fuel the ritual. What this means is that the demon hunters use their voice to create music that evoke and amplify emotions. Igniting their emotions means also igniting their soul and vice versa. And through this resonance, countless awakened souls connect and intertwine at a spiritual level, sharing a bit of their soul's energy to weave what will be the Honmun Barrier, a tangible manifestation of humanity's collective spirit. Symbolically, the Honmun does not just protect humanity, it embodies humanity. It sounds rather inspiring, doesn't it? However, a deep delve into the inner workings of the barrier once again reminds us that the Honmun barrier came from us, flawed and imperfect beings. And yet, why is it that the supposed final form of the embodiment of humanity golden when that's impossible? The answer to that is the underutilization of the barrier. While the Honmun barrier may have utilized the souls of the people, It did not completely access it in all its entire range. It didn't invoke all emotions or thoughts, but rather only the positive ones, mainly courage, unity, and happiness, something that is observed and reinforced by the movie through the demon hunter's words and actions. Courage because of the inspiration and the example they show when protecting people from the demons, unity through the, well, literally unifying people's emotions to make the barrier, and finally, happiness. In fact, happiness is probably the strongest evidence. In the movie, we see Hunchik say the quote, happy fans, happy Honmoon, quite a few times, which reinforced my line of thought that the Honmoon barrier does seem to be representative or is directly affected by the kinds of emotions that are being harvested. In hindsight, this is actually a good thing. Positive emotions are something we naturally chase in our everyday lives, whether we're aware of it or not. People constantly seek experiences that make them feel safer, more connected, and more fulfilled. So it makes perfect sense that the Honmun barrier would draw its strength from emotions like courage, unity, or happiness. These aren't just fleeting moods, they're just fundamental human motivators rooted in the Hon, the thinking, willing part of the soul. These emotions are what push individuals to act selflessly, to act noble, to stand together in moments of crisis and to find light even in the darkest circumstances. They remind us that we can rise above our instincts, especially fear, which belongs to the side of the Beck, our vital essence, the feeling reactive side of the human essence, which is inherently tied to the physical body. But the more important fact here is it was working. Whatever they were doing, it was generally working. For a long time, the Honmun barrier fulfilled its purpose, steadily strengthening and sealing away more demons as time went on. But just as scientists can uncover countless small truths without yet grasping the full scope of a larger reality, this success represented only a fragment of the bigger picture. Something can function reliably, even impressively, without being fully understood. The Honmun barrier's effectiveness didn't necessarily mean its nature was simple or entirely known. It merely meant it worked up to a point. And the breaking point is, of course, Huntrix. It was their time when a glimpse of the fabled Golden Barrier is finally seen, after generations of demon hunters have tirelessly worked to maintain and strengthen it. But this is also when the cracks and seams begin to appear, revealing the flaws that have quietly built up over time. One of the movie's main conflicts is Rumi's secret heritage. She was born as half human and half demon. Even with her guardian, she was often asked to hide her demon marks as this is something that was deemed to be dangerous or nothing short of a taboo. Well, honestly, it's not like it's not understandable. Demons are after all creatures that are very much known for eating or sucking the souls out of humans. I mean, seriously, Rumi's mom was kind of freaky to do it with a demon. I want to see, like, was this demon super handsome like Gino or what? But putting aside all of these things, the emotional reality remains. Rumi's heritage becomes a source of deep stress and insecurity not because of what she is, but because of how others responded to it. We've seen how her imperfection was something she was taught to conceal rather than to understand. And mind you, this imperfection, like quote unquote imperfection, she was asked implicitly and explicitly to suppress a fundamental part of herself, something she couldn't control and something she just is. And the worst part of it is that the request comes from the very person she believes is protecting her. Whether intentional or not, this becomes a form of shame, passed down quietly, disguised as concern. In fact, she is told to hide even from her closest friends, people who have stood by her, supported her, and quite literally helped her find her footing when she began losing her voice. And this detail is so important because Rumi doesn't just lose her voice randomly. Her voice, the very medium through which the Honmun barrier exists, falters precisely when she is most fractured internally, almost as if she is a microcosm of the barrier reflecting the faults that were previously unseen. The suppression of her identity manifests physically, symbolically, and quite literally, magically. This gives us critical insight into the ideology of the demon hunters themselves. That somewhere along the lines, perhaps the message was lost. The original purpose of the Honmoon Barrier was never about purity or perfection. It was about protection and balance. Again, the Taigok principle. And yet, generations later, the belief has warped into something far more rigid. Instead of confronting fear and imperfection, the idea has been shifted towards erasure. Hide the marks, suppress the darkness, never let your true self be seen. Her guardian Celine's insistence that Rumi needs to conceal her tattoos or demon marks is not just personal prejudice. This is actually institutional memory, a belief passed down so long that no one remembers why it exists anymore, only that it must be obeyed. Because after all, you have to remember, this line of demon hunters has been going on for several of generations already. In fact, you can actually pick up hints of this whenever Rumi sings that song in her childhood as you carefully listen to the lyrics. When the darkness meets the light, or whatever. I'm a little bit tone deaf, but you'll have to forgive me. It gives us hints on what the original intent on what the demon hunters were all about. If you'd listen carefully, the song doesn't really say against or any contrasting word on the song. In fact, I think what the song meant is exactly, again, balance. The very lesson that Taiguk was trying to teach us. Being brave doesn't mean shutting down your emotions. It means having the ability to stand up and fight again for another day, even when you're scared. To lean on one another and try to trust and love again and again and again because that's life. Darkness and life will always meet because good and bad things both happen to us while we live. And it's up to us to find the balance even when it feels like our life is just going on to one shitty arc to another shitty arc. You don't get to remove a part of it or deny it. It just is. And this very same lesson directly challenges the foundations of the demon hunter's current belief system. This asserts that wholeness or fulfillment comes from integration, not denial, to which the current line of the demon hunters seem to be following. And yet, in the climax, Celine couldn't even bring herself to look at Rumi in all her entirety, with her demon marks revealed and even aggravated. To her, her worldview was collapsing in real time. It's a very interesting fact to point out here that Celine does not react with anger or hatred, she reacts with avoidance. She turns away because she's experiencing cognitive dissonance, the same kind seen in people shaped by generational trauma. I believe her beliefs were never born from malice, sure, but from fear inherited and reinforced over decades and decades or perhaps centuries of their belief slowly getting twisted. What once may have been a protective instinct has hardened into a shackle, nothing more than preventing her from fully accepting Rumi as she is. In fact, these are classic telltale signs of generational trauma: emotional suppression framed as strength, love expressed through control, and fear disguised as a tradition. The dissonance between Rumi's song and whole life, even, and Celine's values exposes this clearly. Confronted with Rumi's true self, Celine hesitates, not because Rumi is wrong, but because the belief she inherited cannot survive when it was being actually questioned, challenged, or tested. In our own lives, we often underestimate the power of time. Time erodes memories, blurs intentions, and reshapes values. What began as survival can over generations become doctrine, something irrational. But the demon hunters did not choose cruelty. They inherited it unknowingly. And in doing so, they created a system that asked its protectors to be less than human, to be perfect. And this is where the Honmoon Barrier's greatest weakness finally reveals itself. The Saja Boys. Honestly, I have no idea why it took so long for Guima to think of this. It's most likely his arrogance. As I've said before, the demon hunters have been underutilizing the full power of the barrier. They were only using mostly positive emotions to form the barrier, into which slowly became the foundation for their quote unquote golden future. For all its power, the Honmun barrier was never truly uncontested. It relied on emotional resonance, on music that could move the human soul. But the truth is, that ability was never exclusive to the demon hunters. In reality, music does not belong to virtue. It does not discriminate between intention and manipulation. Anyone who understands how to stir emotions can probably influence it, including demons, as we saw in the movie. especially a handsome demon with a very good voice and probably a PhD in music as far as ancient Korean dynasty goes. Yes, I'm talking about Gino. If the Honmun barrier is fueled by collective emotion, then whoever controls the emotional current of the masses controls the barrier itself. And unlike Huntrix, whose music is built around courage, unity, and reassurance, the Saja Boys targeted emotions in the barrier that were left alone by the demon hunters: loneliness, insecurity, longing, and dependency. In fact, if we listen carefully to their two songs, their music actually thrives on parasocial intimacy and emotional reliance. They don't tell their audience to be strong, they tell them that they are needed. They do not encourage unity with others. Instead, what they actually offer are themselves as the center of connection. They offer themselves as the conduit. And this is an important distinction. This creates an emotional loop where fans do not feel empowered. Instead, they feel attached. And attachment, unlike courage, is a very volatile thing because this is something that is fundamentally reliant on an external factor rather than an internal one. In that case, what happens if that external factor disappears or simply stops, well, being an attachment? For example, this lyric: "Yeah, I'm all you need, I will be your idol." Or, "You're all I can think of, every part I crave. Oh, you're my soda pop, my little soda pop." Okay, I don't want to get into musical analysis too much, but I think you get the point that I'm trying to make, right? As I've told before, this weakness of the barrier eventually became its downfall. Just like Celine's beliefs were never questioned, the barrier was also never directly challenged until Gino started scheming and attacking the barrier itself instead of mindlessly sucking the souls of humans. By refusing to engage with the full spectrum of human emotion, the Honmun never really fully represented the principle of balance that underlies Honbek or Teguk, making it vulnerable to exploitation. While the demon hunters amplified Hon, which is will, identity, and idealism, they have superbly neglected the Baek, the raw or the vulnerable emotional core, which gave the Saja boys the opportunity to infiltrate the barrier and use our more unsavory emotions against us. The parts that stir longing, dependency, desire, insecurity, these emotions that linger when people are told to hide their fears instead of facing them. And this is why the demon's influence spreads so easily, to the point that like they only release like what, two songs, and like they've already conquered basically South Korea and pretty much the entire world. Seriously, they were amazing. Like it was like a super rookie of some sorts in the show business. The point is, it's so much easier to be weak than to be strong, which eventually resulted in them successfully weakening the barrier and letting the demons lose once more. You'd even ask yourself at some point in the movie, wow, for a barrier that's been there for generations, it sure got wrecked pretty quickly. Like, really? That's all it took? But actually, that's the point that the movie was trying to make. The barrier was built to repel external threats, not internal fractures. The principles of demon hunters assume that if people feel happy enough, unified enough, brave enough, then darkness will simply fade away. And there is some little truth to that, yes, but darkness does not disappear when ignored. It simply festers. And when someone finally acknowledges it, even maliciously, it feels relieving. And that relief is what the Saja boys sell or package in being an idol. Something that will eventually be the direct perpetrator of the downfall of the Honmun Barrier. And so the barrier falls. The barrier did get destroyed by the demons, but not by the demons you see all throughout the film. To me, the barrier broke because of the inner demons of the main cast. The doubt that have finally settled in the minds of the current generation of demon hunters after generations and generations of misguided belief and traditions that turned hope into a system of oppression. Rumi finally began to question these things in which she once believed in, because that very system that she wanted to perfect is now rejecting her existence. When the barrier began to destabilize or break, we see it shift from its blue color to violent use of violet and pink. These colors are often, again, associated with heightened emotion, vulnerability, shame, grief, insecurity, the whole thing. And then you started to realize, right, we kept reminding ourselves in this whole video that these emotions have always existed within the Honmoon. It's just that it didn't fully utilize that. The barrier merely refused to acknowledge them. Because the barrier was a conduit for millions, possibly billions of people, it carried with it everything humanity refused to process also. The shame, the fear, the loneliness. Over generations, these emotions had nowhere to go. And when the Sage Boys gave these emotions a voice, it didn't introduce corruption. It actually released pressure, as I've said before, finally destroying the Honmoon barrier and its idea of perfection along with it. But the destruction of the Honmoon isn't really the end. It was a necessary reset. It is precisely why this whole video is about the certainty of the Honmoon barrier's downfall. Sometimes, systems built on flawed foundations need to fall before they can be rebuilt properly. And that's exactly what Rumi and Huntrix did. In the final act, when Rumi embraces both her human and demon heritage, she finally stops trying to be perfect. She stops hiding. She stops apologizing for existing as she is. And in that moment of radical self acceptance, she unlocks something the previous generations of demon hunters never could through balance. The idea of Honbek or Taeguk, the new barrier that forms in the end, wasn't golden. It's not blue, nor is it red. It's a rainbow, a spectrum of every color, every emotion, every facet of human experience. It includes the courage and unity, yes, but also the fear, the loneliness, and the anger and the grief. Everything. Because, in the end, that's what it means to be human. We are not just one thing, we are everything, everywhere, all at once. You get it. But yes, we are beings that are in a state of constant flux and contradiction. In fact, this is what the song at the end, this is what it sounds like represents. An acknowledgement that human experience can't be reduced to a single one, or a single note, a single color, a single emotion. It's messy, it's complicated. You will fight, you will stumble, you will fail, you will succeed. There will be a little bit of everything along the way. But in the end, it's these contradictions that somehow make a beautiful harmony, impossibly working together. Rumi had to fall from the tightrope she was walking, the impossible balance of trying to be both demon hunter and half demon while denying half of herself. Because that's stupid. She had to realize she didn't need to balance on that rope at all. She could fly. And in flying, she discovered that her so called weakness, her demon heritage, the very thing she was taught to suppress, was actually one of her greatest assets or strengths. She becomes a perfect representative of the duality of emotions, not by choosing one over the other, but by embracing that both exist, that both are valid and both are necessary. Light and darkness, on and back, never one without the other. And in that is a beautiful irony here. Rumi spent her whole life suppressing her demon side because the Honmoon barrier couldn't tolerate such negative aspects. But it was that very suppression, that denial of vulnerability and darker emotions, that made the barrier weak in the first place. When she finally lets herself be vulnerable, when she finally acknowledges and integrates her demon nature, she becomes more powerful than any demon hunter before her. The thing she was taught to hide was the key all along. At its core, I fully believe K-pop Demon Hunters is a story about breaking generational cycles. It's about recognizing when traditions meant to protect us have become prisons. It's about having the courage to question inherited beliefs, even when they come from the people we love and trust. Because sometimes they can also be blind towards these kinds of things. It's about understanding that wholeness doesn't come from perfection, but from integration of all our parts, even the ones we've been taught to be ashamed of. The movie asks us, what are we suppressing in the name of being good enough? What parts of ourselves have we been taught to hide, but we shouldn't have? And what would happen if we stopped hiding and started embracing the full spectrum of what we can be instead? To see beyond our ugly sides and try to gaze at our full potential. Celine's journey mirrors this too. In the end, she has to confront the fact that her love for Rumi, expressed through control and fear, nearly destroyed the very person she was trying to protect. It was a painful realization, but a necessary one. That true protection doesn't come from hiding someone from the world, it comes from giving them the tools to face the world as themselves. And isn't that what we all need? Not to be perfect, not to suppress our struggles or our pain or our complicated identities, but to be seen. to be accepted, and to be allowed to exist in all our messy, contradictory glory. The Honmoon Barrier was doomed to fail not because it was attacked by demons, but because it was built on an impossible standard. You cannot sustain a system that demands people be less than fully human. You cannot build lasting protection on denial. Eventually, what we refuse to face will find its way to the surface. And when it does, it will be far more destructive than if we had simply acknowledged it from the start. The rainbow barrier at the end of Cape of Demon Hunters isn't just a cool visual effect, it's a promise. A promise that we don't have to choose between our contradictions. A promise that we can both be strong and vulnerable. To have both our light and darkness. To be both perfectly imperfect. A promise that the next generation doesn't have to carry the same shame that we did. And one more thing, the movie is also a love story. And I will never ever forgive them for killing off Gene. I mean, I get it thematically, sure, it can happen, but come on, dude, just let them date. Bring him back. Make a part two. Make a second movie. Or somehow revive him from his distant form. I don't know. Figure out something Netflix. Anyways, that's probably another rant for another video. Anyways, that's about it. See ya.